Do you genuinely want to hear something uncomfortable, something profoundly challenging to your ego, your ingrained defenses, your carefully constructed narrative of self? Something you have likely felt churning, twisting, simmering beneath the surface of your conscious awareness. Perhaps countless times throughout your life, but haven't possessed the raw, unadulterated courage to openly admit, even in the silent sanctuary of your own mind, the persistent, often excruciatingly painful experience of rejection, the very thing you likely try so desperately, so frantically, so strategically to avoid the outcome you fear, perhaps more than any other, is fundamentally not your ultimate enemy. Paradoxically, counterintuitively, almost alchemically, it possesses the latent, potent transformative potential to become your greatest, most illuminating, most fiercely empowering ally on the arduous yet essential journey towards wholeness and authentic power. And no, let me be unequivocally brutally clear from the outset, I am not attempting to offer you hollow, saccharine, false motivation or deceptively soften the often harsh, jagged reality of human interaction. Rejection undeniably hurts. It often burns with an intensity that feels like it sears your very soul. It can feel like it tears at the delicate, vulnerable fabric of your self-worth, leaving you feeling exposed, inadequate, fundamentally flawed. But, and this is the crucial, often overlooked, life-altering counterpart, the hidden pearl within the oyster of pain, it also possesses the profound, almost mystical power to awaken, to shock you out of complacency, to shatter your illusions, to force you onto a path of deeper self-understanding if you possess the courage to face its fiery gaze. Do you truly deeply understand why rejection often hurts so profoundly, so disproportionately, often far beyond the objective significance of the event itself? It's because rejection, when experienced deeply, viscerally, rarely speaks solely or even primarily about the other person, their preferences, their limitations, their fears, their projections. More fundamentally, more revealingly, more usefully, it speaks volumes, shouts truths, exposes vulnerabilities about you, about everything residing often hidden, often unacknowledged inside you, that remains fundamentally unresolved, unhealed, unfaced, unintegrated. When someone delivers that potent, often devastating word, a no, whether in the vulnerable arena of romance, the competitive landscape of a career, the complex dynamics of social acceptance, or even the subtle nuances of familial belonging, they are often not really truly rejecting the totality of you, the authentic, complex, multifaceted individual. They are frequently, perhaps even unconsciously reacting to, perhaps even being repelled by something specific they perceive in you, something you are projecting often unknowingly. Often disturbingly, it's something you yourself might not even want to consciously acknowledge, let alone own within yourself. Perhaps a perceived weakness you desperately try to hide, an underlying insecurity that leaks out energetically, an unmet neediness that creates an uncomfortable dependency, or even paradoxically, a nascent strength, a burgeoning authenticity that inadvertently threatens their own fragile ego, their own comfortable status quo. According to the profound, often challenging insights of Carl Gustav Jung, that master cartographer of the psyche's depths, everything that irritates us in others can lead us to a deep understanding of ourselves. Now apply this powerful psychological principle directly, courageously, to the raw, often agonizing experience of rejection. So tell me honestly, look deep within, past the defenses, past the rationalizations, what specific aspect of you, what recurring pattern, what energetic signature seems to consistently, predictably awaken that negative response, that painful pattern of rejection in others, perhaps across different contexts, different relationships? What particular inner shadow aspect, that repressed, denied, often disowned part of yourself containing qualities you deem unacceptable, shameful, or weak, is being unconsciously triggered, violently brought to the surface, exposed by the harsh light of their no? What deep-seated, perhaps ancient insecurity erupts, overwhelms, perhaps even paralyzes you every single time you feel the familiar, searing sting of being rejected, dismissed, deemed unworthy? Herein lies the profound, almost mystical mystery, the alchemical potential hidden within the leaden weight of pain. Rejection is rarely, if ever, a mere coincidence, a random, meaningless act of cosmic misfortune, a sign of your inherent unworthiness. It often arrives with almost uncanny precision, precisely at the moment you subconsciously need to wake up, precisely at the critical juncture when your soul, your deeper self, is implicitly, urgently signaling that it is time to evolve, time to grow, time to courageously confront something limiting, something unhealed, something inauthentic within yourself that is preventing your full flowering. Rejection isn't just a closed door. It's often a hidden signpost pointing directly towards the inner work you most need to do. Right now, as you engage with these potentially uncomfortable words, you are likely remembering, perhaps vividly, viscerally, that last time someone significant, someone whose opinion mattered deeply to you, rejected you, overtly or subtly. You might be mentally, emotionally reliving the acute, sharp pain, feeling viscerally how something fragile, something hopeful, something essential inside you broke, shattered slowly, painfully again. The familiar script of inadequacy, loneliness, and despair might be playing on repeat in your mind. But what if, just for a moment, I proposed a radical, empowering reframing? What if I told you with unwavering conviction, grounded in psychological truth, that very rejection, that painful, perhaps humiliating experience you desperately wish had never happened, the one you keep replaying, analyzing, agonizing over, might actually be paradoxically the best thing that could possibly happen to you, psychologically, spiritually, existentially, that instead of inevitably weakening you, confirming your deepest, most paralyzing fears of inadequacy or unlovability, it possesses the latent alchemical potential to ultimately make you psychologically indestructible, forged in the very fires of adversity. Imagine this dynamic clearly, starkly. Every single time you desperately, anxiously seek external approval, validation, acceptance, or love from others, you inadvertently, almost automatically make yourself psychologically dependent, emotionally fragile, energetically porous, effectively, a willing, often unwitting slave to the fluctuating opinions, the shifting moods, the often arbitrary judgments of individuals you ultimately don't even control. Individuals who are often struggling with their own unresolved issues, and in that very instant of desperately seeking external validation, of needing their yes to feel okay about yourself, you tragically, ironically lose the very quality, the very energetic signature that often makes you genuinely, authentically, irresistibly attractive in the first place, your inner self-possession, your quiet, unwavering confidence born not of arrogance but of self-acceptance, your inherent, inviolable sense of worth that exists entirely independent of external applause, external validation, external rejection. Because yes, let's be blunt, let's discard the romantic illusions. True, deep, lasting attraction, the kind that possesses genuine magnetism, authentic allure, sustainable power, rarely if ever stems from constant, eager, predictable acceptance, from fawning agreeableness, from desperately trying to please everyone. It often arises, paradoxically, mysteriously powerfully, from the subtle, intriguing, almost challenging mystery of genuine self-sufficiency. When you consciously, deliberately stop desperately seeking approval, when you release the needy, grasping, often repellent energy of constantly trying to please, of needing others to like you naturally, almost automatically begin to project an entirely different, far more potent energetic signature, one of quiet, magnetic, almost challenging, irresistible strength. Why? How does this alchemy work? Because the world, other people, subconsciously, intuitively sense that you no longer fundamentally need it. Their validation, their acceptance, their permission, their yes, to feel whole, worthy, complete, okay within your own skin. You have become sovereign in your own emotional kingdom. And here emerges the darker, more uncomfortable psychological part, the shadow aspect of attraction dynamics that precious few genuinely want to face, acknowledge, or even discuss openly. The more desperately, anxiously, obviously you chase someone, whether romantically, professionally, or socially, the more intensely you try to win their validation, their affection, their approval, the more likely they are, paradoxically, almost instinctively, to reject you, to pull away, to lose respect, to feel suffocated, to devalue you, Why does this counterintuitive, often painful dynamic happen with such predictable, almost universal regularity? Because the human mind, the human ego on a deep primal, often unconscious level, often instinctively despises perceived neediness, senses vulnerability as weakness, interprets desperation as a lack of inherent value. It doesn't ultimately matter how good your underlying intention might be. It doesn't matter how sincere, how pure, how profound your feelings genuinely are. If you consistently energetically emit an aura of desperation, of needing their approval to feel okay about yourself, of subtly or overtly placing the locus of your self-worth in their hands, you inadvertently, tragically emit an energetic frequency, a psychological signal that often triggers discomfort, distance, withdrawal, and ultimately rejection in the other. Neediness repels, self-possession attracts. Conversely, conscious detachment, let me emphasize, not cold indifference, not cynical aloofness, not a defensive shutting down of the heart, but rather the profound inner state of not needing a specific outcome, not being desperately attached to receiving external validation or a particular response, represents pure, unadulterated power, not power over others in a manipulative sense, but the profound power that comes from inner freedom, from emotional sovereignty. Not because detachment magically makes you indifferent to connection or incapable of feeling hurt, but because it reveals both to yourself and energetically to the world a profound, underlying, unshakable truth. You're already fundamentally enough whole, complete, worthy within yourself, regardless of external circumstances, regardless of others' opinions, regardless of whether they say yes or no. Your worth is intrinsic, inherent, non-negotiable, not contingent upon external validation. But how, practically realistically, does one actually arrive at this seemingly elusive, almost mythical point of genuine self-sufficiency, of authentic detachment, especially after potentially years, even decades of operating from a place of neediness and external validation, seeking? The answer, while conceptually simple, is often profoundly, excruciatingly uncomfortable, deeply challenging in its execution. You must summon the unwavering courage, the radical self-honesty to fully, consciously, compassionately accept your own shadow, that often hidden, persistently denied, perhaps even deeply hated, feared, or shamed part of yourself, the repository of your insecurities, your perceived weaknesses, your unmet needs, your repressed desires, your darkness. Carl Jung termed the lifelong, arduous, yet ultimately liberating process of integrating these disparate, often conflicting parts of the psyche, individuation, the challenging yet essential journey towards developing the capacity, the psychological maturity to consciously acknowledge, accept and integrate all your seemingly broken, fragmented pieces, the light and the dark, the strengths and the weaknesses, the acceptable and the unacceptable, into a more whole, more functioning, more resilient, more authentic being. Only when you achieve or consistently, courageously strive towards this state of inner integration, this radical self-acceptance, do you genuinely, truly free yourself from the insidious tyranny of external judgment, from the paralyzing fear of rejection, because you finally understand deep within your core, etched into your very soul, something absolutely essential, fundamentally liberating. No one external possesses the ultimate final power to truly reject you, except ultimately yourself, through your own harsh self-judgment, your own lack of self-acceptance, your own internalized belief in your inadequacy. The rejection you fear most originates within. Think honestly, critically, about how many countless, innumerable times you have likely betrayed yourself, silenced your own authentic voice when it yearned to speak, compromised your own core values for the sake of acceptance or belonging, ignored your own legitimate needs to appease others, overridden your own intuition because it conflicted with external expectations, primarily, almost exclusively, to gain an external approval, a fleeting validation that perhaps never truly, satisfyingly came, or if it did, felt ultimately hollow, empty, inauthentic, unsatisfying, because it required the sacrifice of your true self. How many times did you meticulously, exhaustingly adjust yourself, contorting your authentic being like a psychological pretzel, to fit what you thought others wanted, what you assumed would make them accept you, tragically, completely losing your own essence, your own center along the way, and then the ultimate, the bitter irony. Perhaps you were subsequently rejected precisely for not being authentic, for appearing performative, desperate, inauthentic, for desperately chasing something external. Their approval that should never have fundamentally mattered more than your own internal alignment, your own self-respect in the first place. Here lies the profound, often hidden secret that almost no one explicitly understands or teaches about the alchemy of attraction and rejection. Real sustainable attraction, genuine, irresistible. Magnetism is not primarily or even significantly about employing clever manipulation tactics, deploying cheap reverse psychology tricks, or mastering superficial techniques of seduction. It is rather the pure, natural, organic, almost effortless manifestation of someone who has courageously, painstakingly conquered their own inner shadow, who has done the deep, often painful inner work, who has consciously, deliberately stopped needing external validation because they have finally, fundamentally, irrevocably chosen themselves unconditionally, warts and all. The world, observe it closely, is literally overflowing, saturated with people desperately, anxiously trying to please, perpetually, silently, energetically begging for attention, validation, acceptance, frantically scrambling, competing, often ruthlessly for mere crumbs of affection, approval, or fleeting recognition. Do you genuinely desire to stand out powerfully, magnetically, authentically from that vast, needy, often desperate crowd? Then consciously, deliberately stop looking outward for what can only ever ultimately be found within. Stop begging externally for what must be cultivated internally. Choose courageously, defiantly to walk your own authentic path, guided by your own inner compass, your own intuition, your own values, even if no one else understands it initially, even if it feels lonely at times, even if it means navigating periods of temporary solitude, of seeming isolation, because precisely there, within that courageous, often solitary act of self-fidelity, of unwavering loyalty to your own soul, lies your true unshakable power. There resides the deep, often inexplicable mystery of authentic personal magnetism, of effortless allure. You are not ultimately alone because of some inherent weakness, flaw, or fundamental undesirability. If you choose solitude consciously, deliberately as a space for growth, healing and self-discovery, you're alone by choice. And that conscious choice, that willingness to stand apart, implicitly, powerfully, transmits strength. It radiates courage, self-possession, inner sovereignty. People intuitively, subconsciously perceive it, even if they cannot fully articulate or understand it intellectually. That inner groundedness, that lack of neediness, is the foundation of true sustainable attraction. An attraction that doesn't depend on employing superficial, cheap, manipulative tricks, but rather arises organically, powerfully, magnetically from having genuinely, profoundly transcended the pervasive, crippling, culturally ingrained need to be constantly, desperately approved of, validated, accepted by others. So perceive rejection from this moment forward, not as something that inevitably, permanently sinks you, diminishes you, defines you as unworthy, but as something that, when reframed through the lens of Jungian alchemy, actually makes you potentially stronger, wiser, more resilient, more authentic. Every no you receive, every door seemingly slammed in your face, becomes a potent, invaluable opportunity to look deeply, honestly, courageously within yourself and ask the vital, transformative questions. Why do I feel such a desperate, almost compulsive need for this specific person's or these specific people's acceptance, approval, or validation? Why am I unconsciously, perhaps habitually, giving so much power over my emotional state, my sense of self-worth, to someone external? Someone who likely doesn't even possess mastery over their own life, their own emotions, their own projections. What unmet need, what unhealed wound, what shadow aspect within me is being painfully triggered by this rejection, demanding my conscious attention, my compassionate healing? Rejection awakens you if you allow it. It forces you, often kicking and screaming, to become rigorously, sometimes brutally honest with yourself. It starkly, undeniably shows you the inner work you haven't yet completed, the vulnerabilities you haven't yet healed, the dependencies you haven't yet outgrown. Every single rejection, large or small, functions as an uncomfortable yet potentially invaluable psychological mirror, reflecting back to you with absolute, often painful clarity, precisely who you currently are, what limiting beliefs you hold, what fears govern you, and what you must consciously, courageously face within yourself in order to genuinely, fundamentally grow, evolve, transform. That is the undeniably uncomfortable part, the part that requires immense courage to face, but simultaneously, paradoxically, the most powerful, most liberating part of rejection's hidden alchemical gift. It fundamentally doesn't lie. It reveals with almost surgical, unerring precision your current weaknesses, your points of insecurity, your areas of psychological fragility. But crucially profoundly, it also implicitly, powerfully points towards your latent, untapped potential for strength, for integration, for wholeness, for sovereignty. It shows you where the work needs to be done. So, listen carefully. Now let this message penetrate your defenses. Stop running away from rejection. Stop pathologizing it. Stop interpreting it solely as a verdict on your inherent worth. Consciously, deliberately choose to embrace every no, every setback, every perceived failure, not as a final damning judgment, but as a potential doorway, an invitation towards greater self-understanding, profound emotional freedom, and radical self-acceptance. Accept every perceived rejection as an invaluable, albeit often unwelcome sign that it is perhaps finally definitively time to stop seeking external approval, external validation, external completion as your primary or even secondary source of worth and well-being, and instead begin the essential, empowering, lifelong work of building your self-esteem, your sense of value, your inner kingdom, authentically, resiliently, unshakably from scratch, from within. It is not easy. Let's be clear about that. It is certainly not quick. It requires consistent effort, unwavering courage, profound self-compassion, but it represents the only truly authentic, truly sustainable way to live a life of genuine freedom, power, and fulfillment. True, sustainable attraction. The kind that resonates on a soul level, doesn't arise when you successfully performatively contort yourself into becoming what you think others supposedly want. It emerges organically, powerfully, magnetically, when you finally courageously, unapologetically become what you yourself fundamentally need to be, whole, integrated, self-possessed sovereign, radiating your unique, authentic light from within. True freedom, true strength. The kind that cannot be easily shaken or taken away, lies fundamentally, unequivocally in stopping the lifelong, often exhausting habit of depending on fleeting, unreliable external opinions for your core sense of self. Begin courageously, deliberately living according to your own criteria, your own deeply held values, your own authentic inner truth even, and perhaps especially when no one else understands, approves, or validates your choices. Because in the end, that unwavering, relentless authenticity, that profound emotional independence born of self-knowledge and self-acceptance, the quiet, powerful mystery of one who genuinely knows how to be alone, not out of painful, desperate loneliness, but out of chosen, empowered solitude, because they have finally fundamentally understood and claimed their own intrinsic, non-negotiable worth. That is what truly, deeply, powerfully attracts on the most fundamental, most resonant level. When you finally truly internalize this profound, paradigm-shifting understanding, rejection itself, that once terrifying phantom loses its paralyzing power over you, it becomes merely information, feedback data. Sometimes useful, often irrelevant, never definitive. And consequently, you finally powerfully regain your own power, back from the world, back from the opinions of others, back into the sovereign center of your own being. Always remember this core liberating truth. Rejection is often just the painful yet necessary beginning of uncovering your true, vast, untapped potential, the catalyst for your most profound transformation.